The forest exhales, and when it inhales, you'll know it's chosen you. My name is Ranger Michael Thornton. I was born and raised in Aberdeen, Washington, on the edge of the Olympic wilderness. I joined the service because I thought I knew these woods better than most, thought I understood their moods, their dangers, their rhythms. I knew the sound of elk crashing through undergrowth, the way a cougar stalks so silently you don't hear it until you see the tail vanish. I knew the groan of red cedars in a storm, the way ravens sometimes sound like crying children when they argue overhead. What I didn't know was that a forest can breathe, not in the poetic way people sometimes say, that it breathes through its trees, through its moss and soil. I mean actual breathing, low and deep, so close to human it chills you, but wide enough, resonant enough, that you realize no lungs you've ever known could hold that much air. The first time it happened, I was on a midnight patrol. The fog had settled so thick that even my flashlight barely cut the mist. I reached the cabin at South Ridge, a remote post we used for overnight stops. I stacked wood by the stove, trying to chase out the damp. That was when I heard it. Inhale. Slow. Long. As though something huge had been waiting to take air in. I froze, my axe still in hand. I let out my breath and held still. That's when I knew, because the breathing did not stop when I stopped. It kept going. It went on without me. I stepped onto the porch, raised my light toward the tree line. Nothing moved, but the fog carried the sound, low and steady, somewhere out past the underbrush. I thought of bears. I thought of moose. But no animal I know breathes like that. No animal breathes with such intent, such rhythm. I stood there for minutes, until the sound slowed, then vanished. I told myself I imagined it, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The next day, a hiker failed to return to his car at the trailhead less than 5 miles away. His friends said he'd called out, asked them to wait up, then they didn't hear him again. They thought he'd wandered off trail. Search teams found no trace, no prints, no torn clothing, nothing but a single boot print that She said the breathing guided her steps, speeding when she hesitated, slowing when she rested. I began mapping every report, every disappearance, every night someone claimed the forest inhaled around them. A pattern emerged. The encounters happened in the same places, ancient groves, untouched stands where logging had long been forbidden, trees older than the town itself. They weren't random. They were aligned along old logging roads, as though the forest marked scars left behind, reclaiming the wounds of centuries past. I tried to convince my superiors to restrict camping in those sections, but they dismissed it. They said people panic, hear wind, hear their own heartbeat, turn it into monsters. They said sound carries strangely in valleys. They said stress does things to the mind. But I knew what I'd heard, and I knew I wasn't alone in hearing it. One night, I stayed at a fire lookout tower high above the canopy. No wind, no rain, nothing stirred. I sat with my thermos of coffee, trying to write notes, when the floor beneath me thrummed. The breathing rose from below, slow at first, then deep. It pressed into my bones. I held my breath again, testing, desperate to prove I was the one making it. But the forest kept inhaling without me. The sound grew so loud I swore I saw the treetops shift, branches swaying though the night was dead calm. I exhaled, and the forest seemed to exhale too, an echo that came from every direction at once. I stared into the endless trees, knowing something waited there, unseen but aware of me. When dawn came, I reviewed the recordings. Static again, but one clip carried a single low frequency, steady, repeating like lungs. Audio engineers analyzed it. They said it resembled tidal air, the pattern of human breathing slowed to a scale impossible for a body. Impossible, unless the body was miles wide. The more I stayed out there, the more it felt as though the forest was watching, waiting. At times, I would stop mid-trail, sensing it. The breathing would hold, silent, until I moved again. Then it would resume, matching my pace, coaxing me forward. Once, while searching for a missing boy, I followed it. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe something else. The inhale seemed to call. For minutes, all I heard was the rhythm, closer, closer, until it pressed against the thin wood of the door. The handle rattled, then silence. Just silence, so heavy it rang in my ears. I stayed awake until dawn, too afraid to move. When light finally spilled across the forest floor, I stepped outside. My footprints from the night before had been erased. In their place were impressions in the soil, wide, deep, round, as if something had pressed down with the weight of an entire lung. I have walked these woods for 20 years. I have seen storms flatten trees, floods carry whole valleys, fires turn hillsides to ash. But nothing unsettles me like that sound. Because a storm is blind, fire is indiscriminate, but breathing means awareness. Breathing means intent. And so I tell you this: if you ever stand among trees so old they bend with memory, if you ever hear it, the inhale, the exhale, and you stop to listen, count your breath carefully. If the forest keeps breathing when you do not, it has noticed you, and once it notices, it does not forget. The forest exhales, and when it inhales, you'll know it's chosen you. They were 4 in number, young adults who thought themselves seasoned hikers, though their boots were too clean, and their packs still bore tags from a gear shop in Seattle. They had chosen a site not far from one of the old groves, a place I had warned others to avoid. But the allure of ancient trees always tempts those who want photographs more than safety. They pitched their tents in a small clearing beside a stream. The water trickled quietly, steady as breath, and the canopy loomed high above them like ribs of some vast creature enclosing its lungs. The first night was calm. They cooked a simple meal, laughed too loudly, shone their headlamps into the trees as though daring the dark to answer back. Nothing did. But the forest waits until laughter dies, until the lanterns burn low, until the last human sound fades into silence. That is when it begins. One of them, his name was Aaron, woke near midnight. The campfire embers still glowed faintly through the nylon of his tent. He thought he had been stirred by wind, but there was no wind. The air was still, heavy, pressing against his ears. He lay quiet, listening. That was when he heard it. A long inhale, deep, measured, moving the earth itself. Then an exhale, so slow it seemed to go on forever. He held his own breath to test. The sound did not stop. Aaron unzipped his tent with trembling fingers. The clearing lay bathed in moonlight. Nothing moved among the trees. His friends' tents were silent lumps around him. He whispered a name, then another. No answer. Only that steady rhythm, close, so close it seemed to come from just behind him. He spun, light flashing across bark and shadows. There was nothing there. But the sound remained, patient, unhurried. He did not sleep again. He sat upright in his tent until dawn. When morning came, he unzipped the flap fully, calling out for the others. What he found has never left me. The campsite was not as he had left it. 2 tents were collapsed, shredded as though something inside had torn outward in desperation. The ground around them bore drag marks, as if bodies had been pulled but never far. Of the 3 who had lain down beside, and when the coroner cut them open, he found no air in their lungs, only soil. Dark, damp earth packed into the cavities where breath should have been. The report was locked away. Officially, the cause was listed as environmental asphyxiation, some elaborate phrasing meant to hide what we all saw. But in my own notes, scrawled hastily before sleep could dull memory, I wrote only one line. Their lungs were filled with soil. The forest had inhaled them, and it had not given them back. The tower at Deadfall Ridge has stood longer than most men in uniform remember. Built in the 30s, its wood still carries the scent of smoke from decades of wildfires fought and lost. Every ranger posted there complains of the loneliness, the way silence folds itself over the rafters. But silence is never complete, not in those woods. I obtained the logs from one of the last watchmen assigned before the site was abandoned. His handwriting is careful at first, crisp block letters, routine and disciplined as the work demanded. Each entry stamped with the date, the hour, the weather, the condition of the forest below. The first pages read as expected: temperatures, wind speed, visibility. Then, on the third night, the tone changes. 2140, sky clear, visibility excellent, hearing something. Thought it was wind at first, but the trees aren't moving. Sounds like breath. Long, uneven. My radio picked it up too. Static. Then like someone on the other end was exhaling into the mic. No call sign. Nobody out here but me. The following night, his handwriting grows hurried, slanted. 0112. Tried raising bass on channel 3. Got reply, but no voice. Just breathing. Labored. Like someone asleep but louder. Kept saying, "Hello, identify," but no change. Went on for 2 minutes before it cut. He drew a line beneath that note, pressing hard enough to tear the paper. Then, another entry. 2:45. Trained spotlight down slope. Saw. God. Dozens. Breath clouds. Hanging in the dark between trees. White fog, puffing in and out like lungs in the cold. Couldn't see who they belonged to. No faces, no bodies, just the breath. Hovering, moving closer. By now the pencil strokes are erratic, breaking, as though his hands shook. 3:30. They don't scatter. I shine the light and they just hang there, pulsing. Tried radio again, same response. Breathing in sync. Not mine, not human. There are smudges across the next line, as if his hand dragged over damp ink. 0405. Coming closer. Breath clouds at the base of the tower. Don't see feet. Don't see anything. Just the fog. Every exhale makes the glass frost. The report came from a trio of spelunkers, seasoned explorers who had charted dozens of cavern systems across the Pacific Northwest. They had heard rumor of an unmarked cave near the base of Black Hollow Ridge, a fissure hidden behind fallen stone and moss. The locals rarely spoke of it, and when they did, it was only to say the place was wrong, that the earth there did not sit still. They set out at dawn, helmets fitted with lights, ropes coiled at their sides. When they reached the site, the air was already strange, cool, damp, but shifting, as though the earth itself sighed. The mouth of the cave was narrow, a jagged crack in basalt that widened as they pressed inside. Their first notes spoke of dripping water, stalactites glistening like teeth. But soon, one of them noticed the walls. The stone was not still, not entirely. When their headlamps swept across the surface, shadows shifted in a way rock should not. The walls seemed to swell outward, then sink inward again. Slowly, rhythmically. One of them placed a gloved hand against the surface. It was subtle but undeniable. The wall was moving, as though the cave itself was breathing. They pressed deeper, recording as they went. The sound grew louder with every step. Inhale, low, cavernous, pulling air through unseen tunnels. Exhale, long, wet, rattling through stone. It reverberated so strongly that dust fell from the ceiling in soft showers. They joked nervously over the radios, but their laughter faltered. The deeper they went, the more it felt as though they were no longer inside rock, but inside something alive. At one shaft, they prepared a descent. The lead climber clipped into rope, adjusted his gear, and dropped slowly into the darkness. His light dwindled to a pinprick. The other two fed the line steadily. His voice crackled through the radio. "Chamber opening below." Breathing's louder here. God, it's shaking my chest. Then came a sudden jerk. The rope snapped taut. The climber's voice cut into a scream. But it wasn't the scream of someone falling. It was the scream of someone being pulled. The line strained downward, dragged with impossible force, as though the darkness below had seized him. They fled, scrambling up the passage, abandoning gear, never daring to look back. When they emerged into daylight, hours later, their hands were bleeding, their faces pale. The cave behind them exhaled one final time, a gust so strong it carried dust and grit into the trees. Then it fell silent. They returned once, weeks later, with a larger team. The fissure was gone, collapsed in on itself, buried, as though the forest had drawn breath and sealed the wound. The man they lost was never recovered. His name etched into the logbooks of missing persons, his body surrendered to whatever lay breathing in the dark below. It began, as many tragedies do, with a game. In the small towns that border the forest, children have long whispered stories to one another, tales older than their parents, older than the fences meant to keep them safe. They say the forest listens. They say the forest breathes. And from those stories, a game was born. They called it Hold Your Breath. The rules were simple. When you walked past the tree line, when the shadows stretched long and the wind rattled the needles above, you had to hold your breath. Every step, every second, you kept your lungs still. If you could cross without exhaling, you proved the forest hadn't noticed you. But if you breathed, the forest might breathe back. One summer evening, a group of children dared each other at the edge of Alder Creek. The air was warm, the cicadas loud, the tree line looming before them. 5 of them locked hands, shoulders pressed together, and drew one last gulp of air. Then, stifling laughter, they stepped forward in unison. The first few feet were easy. Their sneakers scuffed against pine needles, their eyes darted toward one another, cheeks puffed with held breath. But the deeper they moved between trunks, the heavier the air became, as though each step pressed down upon their lungs. One boy, a wiry child named Daniel, began to falter. His eyes watered, his chest convulsed. He tried to hold it, tried to push forward, but then, with a sharp gasp, he broke the rule. He breathed. The others heard it. A ragged inhale, a desperate exhale. And then, in the space of a heartbeat, Daniel was gone. Not stumbled, not fled. Gone. His hands slipped from theirs, his place in the line empty. The forest swallowed him with no sound but the echo of his breath. The children screamed, scattered back into the open air, but as they tumbled into the field, one froze. He swore he could still hear Daniel. Not his voice, not his footsteps, his breathing. Low and steady, threading through the trees, chasing them even as they fled. Another child claimed the sound followed them home, that he heard it outside his window at night, the steady rhythm of lungs too large, too patient, waiting. In time, the story spread. Parents told and the children who grew up with that story, they never forgot the lesson. When they passed the woods, they walked faster, lips pressed tight, lungs aching. Some swore they felt a pressure at their backs, as though unseen arms pushed them forward, urging silence. But not all escaped. And to this day, when the wind dies suddenly near Alder Creek, when even the birds fall quiet, those who live nearby say you can hear it. The echo of children still holding their breath, and the slow, patient rhythm of something waiting for them to fail. We found it after a storm, half buried at the base of a cedar that had been split by lightning. The tree's trunk was charred, sap boiling from the wound, and beneath its roots lay something none of us had ever seen before. At first, we thought it was a bundle of rotted bark, twisted and pressed together with moss. But when I pulled it free, I saw that it had been shaped, deliberately, into the crude likeness of a face. Eye holes gouged into the wood, a slit where a mouth should be, strands of dried lichen hanging like hair. We called it a mask, though it looked less made than grown. The moss across its surface was still damp, still alive, clinging as though the thing had been breathing beneath the soil. My partner joked about putting it on. I told him not to, but curiosity gnaws at a man when he's alone with something he can't explain. That night, in the ranger cabin, I heard him moving, the scrape of wood against skin. When I turned, the mask was already on his face. For a moment he laughed, muffled, his voice echoing oddly through the bark. But then the sound changed. The laugh caught in his throat, twisted into a choke. His hands clawed at the edges of the mask, but it clung to him, sealed as though it had taken root. I watched in horror as his chest stilled. His body convulsed once, then went rigid. His mouth beneath the mask no longer moved. His lungs no longer drew air. Yet I could hear breathing, slow, deep, steady, coming from the mask itself. The slit at its center widened and closed, as though it alone carried life. I shouted his name. I shook him. His body was already limp. His chest had collapsed inward, caved as though emptied from within. And still the mask sighed. Each exhale whistled through its mouth slit, damp and rasping, like the sound of wind through a hollow log. I pulled at it, tried to wind it, tried to wrench it free. My fingers bled where the bark cut me. The thing would not come off. Only when his body went slack, when the weight of him toppled sideways to the floor, did the mask finally release its hold. It slid away without effort, as though it had finished what it wanted. I stared at it there, lying in the lantern glow, moss damp and... If you ever find a face in the forest, do not try it on. It already knows how to breathe. My name isn't important. What matters is that I'm the last one left. I had a cabin deep in the pines, far from the campsites, far from the trails. The kind of place you only find if you already know where to look. I built it with my own hands. I thought it would be safe. The first time I heard them, it was winter, snow thick against the windows. My stove was burning low, the firewood crackling as it settled. I thought it was just the wind at first, the sound of the forest shifting. But the wind doesn't inhale. The wind doesn't exhale. I grabbed my recorder, an old tape machine, nothing fancy, but it picked up everything. When I played it back, the hairs on my arms rose. Dozens of breaths, layered on top of each other. Some shallow, some deep, some ragged, like lungs filled with water. And threaded between them were breaths that didn't sound human at all. Low, wet pulls of air. Hollow sighs that stretched far longer than a pair of lungs could hold. Night after night, they came closer. At first it seemed like they circled outside, moving around the porch, brushing against the windows, leaving frost marks on the glass where the warmth met their unseen bodies. But then, something changed. I woke once, gasping, certain I had felt someone leaning over me. The sound of breath was everywhere, not above me, not beside me, in the walls. As if the logs I had stacked, nailed and sealed with my own hands, had grown lungs of their own. As if the cabin itself had begun to breathe. The boards flexed under my palms, warm with a heat that wasn't mine. I pressed my ear to the wall. All these accounts, campers vanished with soil in their lungs, the lookout's final gasp cut short over the radio, the cave that rose and fell like a chest, the children stolen mid-game, the mask that sighed through the dead, the lone survivor who heard his cabin walls drawing air. They are not fragments. They are not coincidences. They are pieces of a single truth. The forest does not breathe because of the wind, or the sway of branches, or the shift of the earth. No. The forest breathes because something vast lives beneath it. Something older than the soil, older than the roots that pierce it. With every inhale, it gathers. With every exhale, it releases. And what it gathers is us. Every missing name, every stilled chest, every last cry buried in the pines. It does not fade. It is drawn in, kept. That is why the breathing never sounds the same twice. Each inhale is a voice you knew, a breath stolen and carried down into the dark. Listen long enough and you'll hear it. Not the forest, not the air, but the sound of names being swallowed one by one. until there is nothing left above ground but silence. And now, as you sit here, the sound grows closer. You hear it beneath my words, don't you? Layer upon layer, pressing against your ears, rising, falling, until it sinks with your own chest, until you cannot tell where your breathing ends and its begins. So hold your breath. Don't let it take you. Don't let it know you're here, because once it does, you'll hear yourself in the next inhale, whispering through the trees, forever. Hold your breath. Don't let it find you.